Hello everyone, how's it going? So in this video, I would like to show you how to make this exact scene. This is targeted towards beginners. In this video, I will be showing you how to do this terrain, how to do some of the texturing, how to do the vegetation scattering, and how to all around have a very quick able to concept certain architectural designs, right? So I decided to go with this one precisely since it is extremely simple to follow and it does not require any advanced understanding. So if you are a beginner, you have around 4 to 5 hours inside of Blender, you would be able to follow through. I will also be showing you how to do the lighting. This scene is based on an older project of mine in which I have used F-Storm. Now I decided to use the same subject in order to save up on the time a little bit, and I will be providing you with this model down in the comments inside of a drive folder. Now for this one as well, I would like to also use publicly made assets. So I won't be showing you how to make the vegetation from scratch. I will hopefully be doing that in the future. However, I would be doing that using SpeedTree, which is why I decided to use add-ons such as the GeoScatter add-on with a couple of scat packs. And if you do not have access to that, you could just use the regular particle systems following multiple tutorials through YouTube. Now hopefully you got a couple of things out of this tutorial, and I'll see you then. So here I am adding a plane, subdividing it by around 20 times, playing around with the proportional editing in order to have a more interesting shape to the terrain. I will also try to have a higher height in the area away from the camera and behind the house in order to emulate a mountainous area. It's also wise to add a camera. I want the camera to catch the house from two sides, right? It's also wise for the position of the camera to have a realistic height for beginners, obviously. Now, it's best if you choose a height anywhere from 140 centimeters up to 190. Now, that's what the average human would be in between, and you have a wiggle room of around 20 centimeters plus and minus. Where I am setting the camera settings. It's also wise to have the composition guides, and we want to frame the house in the middle, so we also do some shift on the y-axis. It's also important to have the lighting from the get-go, right? The lighting is crucial for the composition. I will be using the simple sky texture. I will be getting it down since it is overexposed. I will also add some ozone, and I will also have a bit of a higher altitude since this is after all set to be in a mountainous area. You could always play around. I chose 2000 meters, right, which is what might have made sense, right? Now at this point I will be adding the texture that I have. It is the aerial rocks. You just append the texture, download it from Polyhaven, which I will be showing you in a moment. You append the material, you go ahead. You could find it on Polyhaven website in the texture category. Now, why did I choose aerial? Right, you might see it holds less details. Well, I chose it for the fact that I don't have to tile it way too much, right? It is already very big, so I can tile it only once for this terrain, or twice or thrice. Now it depends on how it looks from the camera. If it is realistic but it looks bad from the camera angle, what's the point? Now here I am a bit struggling with the language, with the hotkeys. Also playing around with the camera height. I chose 1.6 meters or 1.7. Now as you can see, I'm playing around with the UVs. I won't be seen in of the texture, however, it's still a decent practice. Now I also removed displacement since I won't be needing it, and it will be only causing me headaches when I will be adding a path, right, which I will be showing you in a moment. Also make it interesting with some sculpting, make it interesting with displacement textures, make it interesting with default noise. Just anything to make the scene have a bit more interest, to catch more light once we add the vegetation. Shadows are your friend. Now at this point, I will be showing you beforehand, I will be showing you how to add trees, since it is very important to frame the camera using trees, right? It helps to draw your eyes and it helps with the lighting immensely. You really need shadows. I will be speaking about this in the near future with higher details and show you the theory behind everything that I'm doing. However, for now, I just want you to follow what I am doing. Now for this, I will be doing a quick weight paint. I do not want the camera to be obscured by any tree. And I definitely do not want any trees intersecting or growing out of the house or the barn. So here I am playing out with this. I still have a slightly lower resolution for the terrain to qualify me to change it a bit more freely. You go to the color masks in the geoscatter add-on and you choose your group that you just painted. Now, playing around with the render, I will also be playing around with the default scale, which I will get down to probably by half, and also play around with the instances amounts. As you could see, it's greatly improving our lighting. It's all about the values, right? So at this point, I will be showing you how to add the path. Now for the path, I decided to go for a more modular look, right? It is what's used mostly in games for path. You could do it by the texturing techniques, using masks or other technique. You could do it with the sculpting. You could do it with multiple ways, or just use meshes and overlay them. However, I would like to show you this technique using the curve modifier. Now, as you could see, I added a plane, scaled it to an appropriate, a bit of a modular scale piece, right? Played around with the shape to give it a bit of a extrusion towards the top. Added a mirror modifier with clipping on. It's really important to have that. Also added an array on the y-axis. It obviously depends on your case, right? You could play around with the count wherever you want. You should also press on merge in the option of the array. However, I will be doing that later on once I add the subdivision. Now, as always, add your curve. I prefer the path in general. For the path, I prefer to have it in the same, you should actually, not prefer, it's not optional, you should have it in the same origin as your mesh. It works really well that way, which is why I like to keep it in the origin point, right? Now after this, you will have to test this out using the curve modifier on your actual mesh and see if it deforms well. Sometimes you have to rotate it in order to fit well, so just play around usually with the z-axis or the x-axis depending on how you modeled your mesh. Now it's, for my case, minus 90 degrees on the z-axis. As you can see, it's working as we expect it to work. Now it's also a smart way to conform it to our terrain is do a nice technique that I currently use. I activate the vertex. I choose a starting point and the ending point, and I could then later on play around with all of the vertices or control points that are in between. Now, as you could see, it's very, very modular. You could play around. You could it's not too long. We'll add more arrays. You need more curve. Just play around. You need more resolution. Add a subdivision surface. For conformity to the terrain, I do not want it to be interesting. In fact, I want it to be extruded a little bit more in order to compensate for the amount of terrain for the amount of grass that I will have. If it does not conform well, you probably do not have enough resolution, which is why I add a bunch of control points in the segments of the curve, right here, as you could see here. Here I am just playing around. I do spend time to conform it. I do not have to. I just do not want it intersecting with our ground, right? Now, you could also alternatively try to conform your mesh, your terrain to the path that you have, which is what I'm going to do as well here. It all depends on your preference. You want to conform the path or conform the mesh. Sometimes it's easier to conform your mesh of your terrain, which is what I'm doing here. Now, as you can see, I'm trying to make it look relatively useful. I could go obviously very sloppy in here since trees and grass hide a lot of mistakes. Here I am also coming back to the weight painting in order to not have any trees intersecting with our path. So again, F and drag to play around with this, with the radius, and also you could do that from the up top panel, right? So I'm just playing around from the camera view. Also make sure to be always view it through the camera view and through the render view. As you can see, it's really improving the lighting. The shadows are really interesting. Here I am playing around with the lighting a little bit more. And at this point, I will be extending our terrain. As you could see me do, I duplicated and separated the boundaries to create a certain mountainous area without actually needing to add a terrain. I did X dissolve, right? I also did M by distance in order to simplify the shape so I can manipulate it a lot better later on. As you can see, I'm just playing around with it. I will subdivide it a couple of times in order to have more geometry to work with. I want this to have a certain shape to help me with the composition. As always, I also added a bit of height. I want it to look like a mountainous area. I want the size of the frame of the image to have more trees, and I want the sky to be obvious from the front, right? So giving me kind of an oval shape. I'm also using the forestation pack, right? I will be playing with the settings again, this default scale and the density. Now this is just trial or error, you know, it greatly helps to have cycle being this fast in these sorts of changements, right? It greatly helps to visualize. You do not have to take render the image that you are doing. All right, I'm just playing with it from different views, make sure that it holds up from afar, right? I do not want to see the horizon. I do not want to see anything that is not trees in the background, right? Or grass. So here I am doing again that, playing around. I will also play around with the scale, get it a bit smaller or higher. I'm reverting back. I will also add a little bit more instances, which totally hides the issues behind. Okay. Now, as you could see, I will also be adding some spruce trees, right, to have more variations. Now, for this one, I will be doing the exact same thing, playing around, adding the culling mask, and just playing around with the seed in order to have a relatively decent look. I also am looking at the lighting of the scene more so. If it does give the lighting of the scene a really positive look, you know, I could go on and on and on, just playing around with this to see a decent dampening light, right? I want a decent pattern of the light, and also it will help the light rays, you know, when we add volumetrics. Here I am just playing around with the lighting angles, playing around with the seed, right? Going back and forth until I find a decent spot, and always just playing around with the mask that I have added, like the weight map. Playing with the elevation, playing with the rotation, playing with the intensity. Now, at this point, I am happy with the way the trees look. However, I would prefer to add a different group in order to add the grass. Now, I added a group, did not name it at all, since I do not have many, and I will be painting over our path. I do not want any grass growing out of the path. I want to see the path. So here I am playing around. I will always go back and play around with this. It's really easy to go back to, right? So I will be also using the grass blade pack, which is a scat pack, right? I will be using one of any of these. I have already made the scene prior, so I know that I want the middle. It took me like around 20 minutes just trying around different presets, seeing what I like the most. Ideally want something not as vibrant, right? It is a forest. It's not a garden. So here I am just trying to optimize the way it looks, you know, it adds these. You could add camera limitations. I also like to change the way this looks in views, right? I'm showing you just the options that are available if you do purchase this add-on. Now, you could do a lot of things. You could try the repulse, right, property in this add-on, which is very useful. In this case, I did not want to show you how to do that. I will also do the same for all of the other layers that I have, checking one by one to see if they hold up or if the scale is correct. Now, what I really like about it is it's already layered in a decent-ish manner. You could always go back to, like, for example, here I don't want as much grass, right? The grass is way too big. So here I am just playing around, doing my color mask again, doing the same thing. I do believe that there is a better way than to do this for each object. However, I'm not sure how to do that, right? I am not as experienced in geoscatter as much as I am in forest pack. Here I am again, going back to the weight map, right? Now, at this point, I will be visualizing a lot, going to the render view a lot in order to see how this all looks. So at this point, I would like to add a texture to the path. Now, I use bridge, since I do have access to that. You could use anything that you want. You could use a Blender kit. You could use ambient CG. All of these have really great textures. For me personally, I like the ones from Bridge, right, from Quixel. They are very easy to work with. You should always go back to them, spend some time improving them, right? It comes up a little bit crooked. Now I will be doing the UVs. Now for the UVs, I have a quick tip for you. I will rotate the whole thing by 45 degrees. Now I want this to be straight. You could do that by using an add-on. However, I would prefer to do this manner. Now rectify one quad, right? Like I am doing here, SY0, SX0 again. Press the active quad and follow active quad, and it will straighten it out for you. Now we have a great UV map that we could use. I will be also adding some more subdivisions to add some displacement. You don't have to do that. You could add actual scatter geometry, right, using the grass blade pack in itself. However, I did not want to do that. Could do that in the shader editor, right? Or you could do that in the textures, in the shading panel. So here I am just playing around with it. I should choose the UV, like you can see me here. And here we have a relatively good terrain, which will look substantially better once we have our lighted setup. Now at this point, I want to have in front of the camera, for the sake of composition, a big shadow, right? I added a plane for that. You could play around with the plane, right? I'm playing around with how it's positioned from the camera view. You should always look through your camera view, rotating it a bit, playing around with the way it looks, right? I do not want any light in front of the camera, since I want the light to be focused on the house, to draw your eyes there better. I will be talking about that later on more. I also like to give it a realistic type of color. I do not want white, since it does reflect. I also want a little bit of light seeping through, right? So this is why I'm adding a noise texture. For the noise texture, you could play around with it. I will also add a color ramp to crunch the values in order to have a decent alpha map. Now, as you could see here, I'm playing around with how crunched it is, right? You can't really predict how it works, right? We don't really judge values as well as they really are. And as you could see here, once it's as if it doesn't exist, so I have to crunch it even more so, right? Here I am just playing around. I want just some tiny light seeping through our plane with the noise texture, right? And here I relatively love the way it looks, especially with the grass on. It will look great, right? So this is optional. You could add some trees or some additional rocks. I did that using Bridge. I also have my own rocks library. However, like I mentioned earlier, using publicly available assets. I will be providing my custom-made trees using Speed Tree or Made in the Grove add-on later on. However, they are not as organized, which is why I'm not sharing them until now. They will be free, hopefully, in the future. So here I am just playing around, spending a little bit of time to add some details. This is where you really have a lot of time to spend, right? The first 80% should come easily when building a scene and really fast, which is why I'm showing you these really simple techniques. I could go around and do this the hard way. However, what's the point? The last 20% is what takes time, is what makes the image different from the rest. Now, obviously, for this image, I myself, without teaching it, I made it in around 55 minutes, right? Up to 1 hour. The one that I made in F-Storm took me around 6 to 7 hours, right? So it took a lot more time, which is why it is a lot more polished. Now, here I am adding some displacement to this. You don't really have to do that, right? However, I wanted to have a slightly more realistic rock in front of the camera. I really love the way these rocks look, especially when you have the origin of the sky. It looks great, right? Also, playing around with the snapping tool, right, helps me position these things better. Playing around with R. If you want an unconstrained rotation, you could press R twice. I am just going around, playing around. I also think about how the light interacts. Here I am, I'm positioning this rock to have a bit of a decent tree shadow, right? Again, now I will be adding my volumetrics. Volumetrics are very important. Now, as you can see, I'm just playing around with it. I like to scale it down on the Z-axis so it does not change the way my sky looks. I still want a vibrant sky. I'm adding a principled volumetric shader. I set the density to 0.003, the anisotropy to around 0.7, 0.6, and added some very, very slight emission with a slight bluish tone. Also, playing around with lighting, you should always experiment with multiple lighting. I will be showing you a different lighting setup of this exact scene, which is one lighting that I really like to do. Also, again, I want to have a sky texture. You could do that with planes. However, I want to show you this technique, right? It's very known. However, why not just show it again? Add an environment texture, right, from Polyhaven again. For this one, I have used the rural asphalt road, right? I play around with this rotation, right? Play around with the hue saturation. I want to be very saturated, especially when we see the volumetrics. It makes it very dull, per se. So here I am playing with how realistic it is, playing with the value, playing with a lot of things. Now, we don't want it for the lighting. We want it only to be visible to the camera. So what I did is a mixed shader. Add our sky, right? And then add a light path node. For the light path node, we want to choose the in-camera ray, which is only shows to the camera, right? But it does not affect the lighting or does anything other than just show the pixels, right? So it does not affect the reflection. You could do that if you want the reflections like I did in my previous project that you could see the breakdown of. I wanted the reflections of the lighting, of the HDRI, and I wanted the lighting. So here I am just playing around, seeing how it looks, right? You could always go around and polish it. It looks a bit empty since I did not want to spend a lot of time and wanted to keep it all the more relatively beginner friendly, right? So the best way to learn is not follow this step by step, but just as a general guideline, right? So watch multiple tutorials while watching this one. Please make something with the model that I give you. It will greatly help you. This is my final result that I made in around 1 hour. And hopefully you have gotten one thing or two things from this scene. And as I mentioned, I will be showing you how to make the lighting. So take care. For now, that will be it.